There's a peculiar moment that arrives in most people's lives, usually around 3 in the morning when sleep refuses to come, where you find yourself staring at the ceiling wondering if this is really all there is. The alarm will ring in a few hours, you'll shower with the same soap, drive the same route, sit in the same chair, respond to the same emails, and somewhere in that mechanical repetition, you'll catch your reflection in a window and barely recognize the person staring back. This moment, uncomfortable as it feels, represents something far more significant than simple dissatisfaction. It's your mind finally gathering enough courage to whisper what it's known for years. You're trapped in a race you never consciously chose to run, competing for prizes you're not even sure you want, and the finish line keeps moving further away no matter how fast you sprint. The rat race isn't just a clever metaphor for modern work culture. It's a psychological cage built from 1,000 tiny decisions we made because everyone around us was making them too. When you're 5 years old, nobody asks what kind of life architecture makes you feel most alive. Instead, the assembly line starts immediately. Good grades lead to good colleges lead to good jobs lead to good salaries, and good salaries lead to good lives, or so the story goes. The problem emerges when you realize that good in this equation has been defined by committee, by people who lived in different times with different dreams, and somewhere along the way, your own definition of a good life got buried under layers of other people's expectations. The psychology of this trap runs deeper than simple peer pressure or societal norms. We're dealing with cognitive frameworks that get installed in our minds before we have the language to question them. Breaking free from this cycle requires understanding why our brains resist change so violently, even when staying put causes measurable suffering. Human beings are pattern recognition machines, and once we've invested years into a particular path, our minds employ every trick available to convince us that deviation equals failure. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy, but it feels less like a fallacy and more like an anchor chain when you're trying to swim toward a different shore. You've spent 4 years getting a degree in engineering, 2 years in graduate school, 5 years climbing the corporate ladder, and now at 31, the thought of starting over in photography or woodworking or teaching yoga feels like erasing everything you've built. Your brain screams that this would be waste, that sensible people don't throw away perfectly good careers to chase uncertain dreams, that stability matters more than satisfaction. What your brain conveniently forgets to mention is that waste happens in both directions. Every year you spend in a life that doesn't fit is a year you can't reclaim, and no amount of salary or prestige refunds that most precious currency. The mental architecture that keeps people locked in unfulfilling patterns operates through several interconnected mechanisms, each reinforcing the others until escape seems impossible. First comes identity fusion, where your job title becomes so entangled with your sense of self that imagining a different career feels like imagining a different person entirely. When someone asks what you do, you don't say you work in marketing while also being a passionate painter and amateur botanist. You say you are a marketing manager, period, as if the 40 hours you sell each week define the totality of your existence. This linguistic shortcut reveals a deeper truth about how we've learned to conceptualize ourselves. We've outsourced identity formation to our professional roles, which means changing careers doesn't feel like switching jobs but rather like losing yourself entirely. Then there's the hedonic treadmill, that cruel feature of human psychology where we adapt to improvements so quickly that they stop bringing joy. You get the promotion you've been chasing for 3 years, feel elated for approximately 2 weeks, and then the new salary becomes your baseline, the new responsibilities become routine, and you're already eyeing the next rung on the ladder. This wouldn't be problematic if the adaptation worked symmetrically, but here's where nature reveals its bias toward dissatisfaction. We adapt quickly to positive changes but slowly to negative ones, which means the relief of escaping a bad situation fades faster than the pain of enduring it. Your mind, in its attempt to protect you from the uncertainty of change, will actually convince you that the devil you know beats the angel you don't, even when the devil is slowly draining your life force one Monday morning at a time. The social dimension of this trap deserves particular attention because it's here that the escape attempt meets its fiercest resistance. Human beings are social creatures not just by preference but by evolutionary design. For most of our species' history, exile from the group meant death, and our brains haven't updated their threat assessment protocols to match modern realities. When you announce that you're leaving your stable corporate job to become a freelance writer or start a small bakery or travel the world while doing remote consulting, you're not just making a career change. You're triggering ancient alarm systems in the minds of everyone who cares about you, and they will respond with what feels like concern but often functions as sabotage. Your parents, who sacrificed to put you through university, suddenly become financial advisors questioning your decision-making capacity. Your friends, who seemed supportive over drinks when you were just fantasizing, start sharing articles about failed startups and the importance of retirement planning. Your partner, who once loved your ambition, now worries about mortgage payments and health insurance. None of these people are villains in your story. They're frightened humans responding to their own internalized fears, and they're projecting those fears onto you because watching you take risks forces them to confront their own unlived lives. When you choose the uncertain path, you become a mirror reflecting back all the dreams they talked themselves out of pursuing, and that's a deeply uncomfortable position for anyone to occupy. This phenomenon intensifies when your passion lies outside traditional academic or career frameworks. Society has built elaborate scaffolding around certain paths. Want to be a doctor? Here's a clear sequence of steps, complete with standardized tests, accreditation boards, and salary expectations. Want to be a lawyer, engineer, or accountant? The roadmap exists, well worn by millions of footsteps before yours. But want to be a craftsperson, an artist, a small-scale farmer, a community organizer, or any of 1,000 other vocations that don't fit neatly into economic spreadsheets? Suddenly you're navigating unmarked territory, and everyone around you interprets the absence of a clear path as evidence that no path exists. The educational system exacerbates this divide by treating non-traditional interests as hobbies rather than viable life directions. A student who excels at painting gets praised for being well-rounded but counseled to pursue something practical as a major. Someone passionate about cooking hears, "You can always cook for fun," while being steered toward business school. The teenager fascinated by sustainable agriculture gets asked what they'll really study in college. This messaging, repeated thousands of times across childhood and adolescence, installs a hierarchy of value in our minds where certain pursuits qualify as serious work and others remain perpetual side projects, things you do after you've finished your real responsibilities. The mental health implications of this cognitive dissonance between authentic desire and conditioned behavior manifest in increasingly visible ways across modern society. Depression and anxiety rates have climbed steadily over recent decades, and while multiple factors contribute to this trend, the alienation that comes from spending most of your waking hours in pursuits that feel meaningless cannot be dismissed as coincidental. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, observed that humans can endure tremendous suffering if they find meaning in it, but we fracture quickly under meaningless comfort. The rat race offers comfort, at least for those privileged enough to secure well-paying positions, but it rarely offers meaning, and that absence creates a specific kind of psychological erosion. You see this erosion in the Sunday evening dread that settles over households across the world, that sinking feeling as the weekend's temporary freedom gives way to another week of obligations. You see it in the explosion of anxiety disorders among young professionals who achieve everything they were told would bring happiness only to discover they feel emptier than before. You see it in the quiet desperation of middle-aged workers who realize they've been climbing the ladder for 20 years without ever questioning whether it was leaning against the right wall. The mental health cost of this misalignment doesn't always present as dramatic breakdown. More often, it shows up as a gradual dimming, a loss of vitality, a sense that you're going through motions while some essential part of yourself watches from the sidelines, waiting for permission to participate. Breaking free requires more than just deciding to quit your job or follow your passion. Those acts, while significant, represent the visible portion of a much deeper transformation. The real escape begins in the mind, in the careful excavation of beliefs you didn't know you held. You have to examine where your definitions of success originated. When you picture a successful life, whose vision are you actually seeing? When you feel ashamed of wanting something different, whose judgment are you anticipating? When you dismiss your interests as impractical, whose voice are you channeling? These questions feel simple, but answering them honestly requires confronting how much of what you think you want was actually installed by others. The process resembles archaeological work, carefully brushing away layers of accumulated conditioning to find what's actually yours underneath. Some people discover that their passion for medicine genuinely comes from within, that they love the work despite the system's flaws, and they find ways to practice that honor their values. Others realize that their interest in medicine was actually their parents' dream, and their own fascination lies elsewhere entirely. Neither discovery is better or worse. What matters is that it's yours, arrived at through genuine self-examination rather than inherited without inspection. This excavation gets complicated by the fact that following your passion sounds delightful in theory but terrifying in practice, and society isn't shy about highlighting every possible way it could go wrong. You'll face a constant barrage of practical concerns, many of them legitimate. How will you pay rent? What about health insurance? Can you really build a sustainable life around this interest? What if you fail? What if you succeed but it's not what you expected? The questions multiply faster than you can answer them, and behind each one lurks the same fundamental anxiety. What if stepping off the prescribed path means stepping into chaos? Here's where understanding the psychology of risk becomes essential. Human brains are notoriously bad at assessing actual danger versus perceived danger. We worry more about shark attacks than car accidents, despite statistics clearly indicating which poses the greater threat. Similarly, we perceive the risk of following an unconventional path as enormous while downplaying the very real risk of staying in situations that slowly destroy our mental health and vitality. The stability of a steady paycheck feels safe even when it comes attached to work that makes you miserable, while the uncertainty of self-employment feels dangerous even when it offers engagement and meaning. Our risk assessment is broken, biased toward visible, immediate threats and blind to slow-moving, cumulative damage. Financial concerns represent the most commonly cited barrier to escape, and they deserve serious consideration without being allowed to become an impenetrable wall. Yes, you need money to survive in a capitalist society. Yes, following your passion in pottery or poetry or permaculture likely won't generate six-figure income immediately, if ever. But the conversation around money and passion operates on a false binary, as if you either pursue wealth through conventional means or follow your dreams into poverty with no middle ground available. Reality offers far more nuance. You can build hybrid models where you work part-time in stable employment while developing your passion project. You can save aggressively for a year while planning your transition. You can start small, testing whether your interest can generate any income before making dramatic changes. You can redefine your lifestyle to require less money, discovering that the things you thought you needed were actually just things the rat race convinced you to want. The resistance you'll encounter from others, while painful, actually serves a useful diagnostic function. The people who immediately support your unconventional choice, who ask interested questions and offer help, reveal themselves as allies in living authentically. Those who respond with fear, criticism, or attempts to talk you out of it are showing you their own cages, not providing objective analysis of your situation. This doesn't mean you should dismiss all concerns or cut off everyone who questions your path. Some criticism comes from genuine care and may contain useful perspectives. The key lies in distinguishing between feedback rooted in fear and feedback rooted in wisdom, and that distinction requires brutal honesty about whose needs are really being served by their advice. Your family's concern about your financial stability might stem from their own experiences of scarcity and genuine desire to protect you from suffering they've endured. That's worth hearing, even if you ultimately choose differently. But when someone who's spent 30 years in a job they hate tells you that following your passion is naive and everyone needs to just accept that work isn't supposed to be fulfilling, they're not offering wisdom. They're defending the choice they made to tolerate misery, and your different choice threatens the narrative they've built to make peace with their compromise. You don't have to be cruel to them, but you also don't have to adopt their limitations as your own. The psychological work of escape extends beyond external resistance to the internal voices that sound remarkably like internalized versions of everyone who's ever doubted you. Self-sabotage appears at every transition point, dressed up as rational thinking. You'll find yourself procrastinating on important steps toward your new path, telling yourself you need more time to plan when you're actually just scared to start. You'll pick fights with supportive partners, unconsciously testing whether they'll abandon you if you become too different from the person they first met. You'll develop mysterious illnesses or injuries right before important milestones, your body expressing the terror your mind won't acknowledge. Recognizing these patterns as fear rather than evidence that you're making a mistake becomes crucial to continuing forward. Mental health during this transition requires active cultivation rather than passive hope. Leaving the rat race means leaving its structures, and while those structures were constraining, they also provided rhythm, social connection, and identity. You need to consciously build new structures that support well-being without recreating the trap you just escaped. This might mean establishing routines that honor your circadian rhythms instead of arbitrary office hours. It could involve finding community with others on similar paths, people who understand the particular challenges of choosing the unconventional road. It definitely requires developing a relationship with uncertainty that doesn't dissolve into constant anxiety about the future. Meditation, therapy, and other mental health practices often get dismissed as luxuries or indulgences, but they function more like essential maintenance when you're rebuilding your life from the ground up. Your mind will throw everything it has at keeping you safe through familiar patterns, and you need tools for working with that resistance rather than being overwhelmed by it. Therapy specifically offers space to examine the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what's possible, and many people discover that the biggest barrier to escape wasn't actually external circumstances but internal narratives that never got questioned. The relationship between following your passion and mental health operates bidirectionally. On one hand, aligning your daily life with your genuine interests and values typically improves psychological well-being dramatically. People report feeling more energized, more engaged, more like themselves in ways they'd forgotten were possible. But it's not a magic cure for all psychological struggles, and this bears emphasizing because the narrative around following your passion sometimes promises transformation it can't deliver. Depression doesn't automatically lift because you quit your corporate job to write novels. Anxiety doesn't vanish because you're finally doing work you love. Mental health challenges often have multiple roots, and while reducing the stress of living inauthentically helps, it's not a substitute for professional support when needed. What does change is your relationship to the challenges you face. Problems encountered while pursuing something you care about feel fundamentally different from problems endured in service of someone else's agenda. When you're struggling to make your small business profitable, the stress is real, but it's your stress, connected to your vision and effort. When you're struggling to hit arbitrary quarterly targets for a corporation that doesn't know your name, the stress is alienating, a reminder of your interchangeability. This distinction matters immensely for long-term mental health and resilience. The timeline for escaping the rat race varies enormously depending on individual circumstances, and comparing your journey to others serves no useful purpose beyond generating unnecessary shame. Someone with substantial savings, no dependents, and marketable skills can make dramatic changes relatively quickly. Someone supporting a family, carrying debt, or dealing with health challenges might need years of careful planning and incremental steps. Neither path is more valid or admirable. What matters is movement toward alignment, however gradual, rather than remaining frozen by the magnitude of the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Small acts of resistance against the rat race's logic can build momentum even while you're still technically participating in it. Maybe you stop checking work email on weekends, reclaiming that time as genuinely yours. Perhaps you begin a creative practice that has nothing to do with productivity or output, just engagement for its own sake. You might start questioning purchases, asking whether you actually want this thing or you're just filling the void that meaningful work would occupy. These seemingly minor rebellions train your mind to remember that you're more than your economic function, and they create breathing room where new possibilities can emerge. The escape also involves grieving what you're leaving behind, and this emotional labor often gets overlooked in favor of excitement about new beginnings. Even when you're leaving something that made you miserable, you're also leaving familiarity, identity, and probably relationships with people who can't or won't follow you into your new life. The you who existed in that old context is dying, and that death deserves acknowledgement even when it's necessary for your rebirth. Trying to skip this grief by staying relentlessly positive about your new direction creates unprocessed emotion that will surface later, usually at inconvenient moments. One of the most insidious aspects of the rat race is how it trains you to constantly defer living. You'll be happy when you get the promotion, when you pay off your loans, when you save enough for a down payment, when the kids are older, when you retire. Happiness becomes a moving target always positioned in the future, while the present moment remains something to endure rather than inhabit. Breaking this pattern requires learning to find satisfaction in the process rather than postponing it until some imagined arrival point. If you can't find ways to engage meaningfully with the journey, you'll simply recreate the same deferral pattern in your new life, always chasing the next milestone instead of actually living. This doesn't mean ignoring practical realities or pretending that meaningful work pays all the bills from day one. It means finding the balance between responsible planning and present engagement, between working toward future goals and appreciating current moments. The barista poet who complains constantly about serving coffee while waiting for their big break is often no happier than the corporate executive doing the same, just with less money. The barista poet who finds ways to practice their craft daily, who treats their coffee job as the thing that enables their writing time rather than the obstacle preventing it, often experiences more vitality despite less conventional success. Success itself needs redefinition outside the rat race's metrics. The dominant culture measures success through external markers: salary, title, square footage, brand names, follower counts. These metrics are useful for comparison, which is precisely why they're so destructive to individual well-being. There will always be someone with a bigger house, better job, more impressive achievements, and using their markers as your measuring stick guarantees perpetual inadequacy. Defining success internally, according to your own values and preferences, feels vulnerable because it can't be objectively verified by others. You can't prove you're succeeding at living authentically the way you can prove you're succeeding at climbing the corporate ladder. But that subjectivity is exactly what makes it yours. Some people escape the rat race and build extraordinary enterprises that achieve both personal fulfillment and conventional success markers. Others create modest lives that look unremarkable from the outside but feel rich with meaning from within. Both outcomes count as success if they align with the person's actual values rather than inherited shoulds. The entrepreneur who builds a multi-million-dollar company around their passion and the craftsperson who makes just enough from their art to live simply have both succeeded at escaping, assuming they made choices consciously rather than stumbling into new traps. The question of passion itself deserves examination because not everyone has a clear, burning passion waiting to be pursued, and the pressure to identify your one true calling can become its own form of trap. Some people have multiple interests they want to explore. Others find meaning in work that's useful rather than passionate, discovering satisfaction in being helpful rather than in the specific tasks. Still others need time to decompress from years of disconnection before any authentic desires become clear. All of these represent valid approaches to building a life outside conventional templates. What matters more than having a specific passion is developing the capacity to pay attention to what energizes you versus what drains you, what makes time expand versus contract, what leaves you feeling more yourself versus less. These somatic and emotional signals provide guidance when intellectual analysis falls short. Your body knows the difference between genuine interest and performances of interest designed to please others. Learning to trust those signals after years of overriding them in favor of external approval requires practice and patience. The intersection of privilege and escape deserves acknowledgement because the ability to leave stable employment and follow unconventional paths isn't equally available to everyone. Economic security, family support, education, health, citizenship status, and numerous other factors create different starting points and different possibilities. Recognizing this doesn't mean that people with fewer privileges should resign themselves to the rat race. It means understanding that escape might require different strategies and longer timelines, and that systemic change needs to accompany individual solutions. You can work toward your own liberation while also supporting broader changes that expand options for everyone. Community becomes increasingly important as you move away from conventional paths because isolation is one of the rat race's most effective weapons. When everyone around you is participating in the same system, questioning it feels crazy. Finding others who've made similar choices, even if their specific paths differ from yours, provides essential validation and practical support. These communities exist both locally and online, and connecting with them counteracts the narrative that you're being irresponsible or unrealistic by wanting more from life than a paycheck and weekends. The role of creativity in escaping deserves particular attention because creativity isn't just about arts and crafts. It's fundamentally about generating new possibilities, seeing alternatives where none seem to exist, combining elements in unexpected ways. The rat race depends on people believing that the current options are the only options, that the way things are is the way things must be. Cultivating creativity, in whatever form speaks to you, strengthens your ability to imagine and build alternatives. You start seeing that stable job with benefits and destitute artist aren't the only two possibilities, that dozens of hybrid models exist in the space between conventional employment and total independence. As you progress in building a life aligned with your values, you'll likely encounter unexpected challenges that the initial excitement obscured. Following your passion doesn't eliminate difficult work, it just makes the difficulty feel more worthwhile. You'll still have tedious tasks, financial stress, self-doubt, and conflicts. The difference is context. Struggling to make your own vision work feels different from struggling to make someone else's vision profitable. This distinction sustains you through hard periods that might have broken you in your old life. The transformation that accompanies escape extends beyond career to affect relationships, consumption, time use, and fundamental orientation toward being alive. You start noticing how many default behaviors serve the rat race rather than your actual preferences. Maybe you realize you don't actually like drinking every Friday night, you were just using alcohol to decompress from work you hated. Perhaps you discover that your expensive wardrobe was costume for a role you've now left. You might find that friendships based primarily on complaining about work have little foundation once that shared grievance disappears. These realizations can be disorienting, but they also create space for more authentic connections and behaviors to emerge. The political dimension of individual escape merits consideration because while personal transformation is valuable, the rat race is a systemic problem that won't be solved solely through individual exits. The structures that make conventional employment alienating and exploitative need collective challenge and reform. Your choice to leave doesn't hurt that cause, it might even help by modeling alternatives, but it also can't substitute for broader action. Many people find that once they've secured their own relative freedom, they have more capacity and motivation to work towards systemic change that expands options for everyone. Fear will be your constant companion through this process, and learning to act despite fear rather than waiting for fear to dissipate becomes essential. Courage isn't the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward while frightened. You'll be scared when you give notice at your job. You'll be terrified when your savings start dwindling while your new venture finds its footing. You'll panic periodically, convinced you've made a catastrophic mistake. These feelings are normal responses to genuine uncertainty, not signs that you've chosen wrongly. The difference between fear that's warning you of actual danger and fear that's just protesting change requires careful discernment, and you'll probably misread the signals sometimes. That's part of learning to trust yourself again. The recovery of trust in your own judgment represents one of the most valuable outcomes of escaping the rat race, regardless of how your specific path unfolds. Years of deferring to external authorities about how to live erode your confidence in your own perceptions and desires. Rebuilding that trust happens gradually, through making decisions and living with their consequences, through learning that you can handle both success and failure, through discovering that your judgment, while imperfect, is at least yours. This trust becomes a foundation for everything else, enabling you to navigate future challenges without automatically looking for someone else to tell you what to do. Walking away from the prescribed path means accepting that you won't have all the answers before you start, that you'll learn through doing, that some experiments will fail spectacularly while others succeed in ways you couldn't have predicted. The rat race offers the illusion of security through clearly defined progression, even when that security is largely illusory. Your new path offers genuine uncertainty, which is terrifying and liberating in equal measure. You trade the comfortable prison of knowing exactly what tomorrow will look like for the uncomfortable freedom of participating in creating it. So here we stand at the end of this exploration, and if you're reading these words hoping I'll provide a definitive formula for escape, a guaranteed 5-step process that makes the transition painless, I have to disappoint you one final time. There is no universal blueprint because you're not a universal person. Your constellation of interests, constraints, fears, and possibilities is unique, and your path out will need to honor that specificity. What I can offer instead is this: the discomfort you feel in the rat race, that nagging sense that you're living someone else's life, isn't a character flaw to be managed with better time management or mindfulness apps. It's information, perhaps the most important information you'll ever receive, and it's asking whether you have the courage to listen. The race will continue with or without you, an endless will turning for those who never question its necessity, but you don't have to keep running. You never did. The cage was never locked, just heavy, and somewhere between this sentence and whatever comes next for you, there's a moment where you realize that the weight you've been carrying wasn't keeping you safe, it was keeping you still, and still is just another word for slowly dying in place while calling it a life.